everyone. Welcome to this edition of HFS Unfiltered. I am Elena Christopher, the Chief Research Officer and Head of Financial Services Research at HFS. And we have a fantastic topic for today. We're going to be talking about hype-busting GenAI, generative AI, aka ChatGPT, in financial services. I think we can all agree that GenAI's gigantic rise, it's captivated consumers and businesses alike with its seeming quick win benefits, and maybe it's still untapped potential. So we're going to talk about this today, about how GenAI can be safely and effectively leveraged in the financial services context for value and maybe even differentiation. I am joined today by a couple of fantastic folks. First, I've got Gil Perez, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Deutsche Bank. Hello, Gil.
Hi there.
We also have Sean O'Donnell, who is the CTO for Financial Services International at Publicis Sapient. Sean also has responsibilities for a range of emerging technologies such as cloud and AI, but welcome, Sean.
Great to be here. Thanks, Elena.
Before we go deep on GenAI, I'd like to level set a little bit with Deutsche Bank's innovation history, partially because you guys have been, and I love when firms do this, where you are very public about some of the things that you're trying to do in the way of modernization. And like, for example, you've been open about some of your investments in innovation and cloud in an effort to impact your cost to income ratio. Could you maybe, and I think this will set us up for that NBT as you've been working on with generative AI, to help us understand a little bit about where Deutsche Bank has been with some of your innovation to set the stage with where you are and where you're going at this point?
When I joined Deutsche Bank in 2019. And at the time, we did not use the public cloud. We had what we called private cloud, which in essence was running our own data centers, but outsourcing them. And what has happened is over the years before that, up to that point, a lot of the technology and the innovation of firms around the world, of the industry, has gone into the cloud, while not as much as has been done on what we call the on-premise world. And also talent. If you look at schools and all of the new technologies, capabilities, everything is now shifting more to the cloud. So in essence, the first thing that we had to do was to create a platform, a basis for innovation. And really the cloud is that. And if you think of even generative AI, if we didn't have the compute power of the cloud, if we weren't able to tap in and out consumption into compute, it would be almost impossible to leverage and to use AI and generative AI in a way that we're doing right now. So really, we had a couple of years of deciding that we're going on this cloud journey, creating the right frameworks and controls to use it responsibly, prudently, within the constraints and the guidelines of regulatory. And you can imagine, as I mentioned before, we're working with 46 different countries, 46 different regulators. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and explanation and approvals that need to be done before we could have had our first production workload on the cloud. And that basically took about a year. So throughout 2021, we really laid those foundations. And then we started moving the workloads on it. And in parallel, we started working on generative AI as the next thing.
I think Elena, the other thing, and Gil, maybe Elena, you touched on it, but I think what Deutsche Bank has been very good at, I think over the last 3+ years, and Gil, I think, hats off, you've kind of driven this, is you've been quite open about what you've been doing, right? In a traditional industry, I won't show my years, but I've been a long time in financial services, and there has been a hesitancy in terms of to to publicize, the work that's going on, even down to partnerships and that kind of stuff. And I don't know, Gil, but I definitely think that we've seen that, both from the outside in, but also in terms of, just working alongside with you guys, which you don't normally see with other firms.
I would thank you for mentioning that, Sean. And that's why, my intent in wanting to bring up some of the innovation backstory is because I was very certain that it starts to point to the underpinnings of why you're able to do anything with AI, let alone generative AI. So thank you for pulling through that thread. But I feel like financial services, as an industry I've worked in for, I too don't need to enumerate my years, but it's perhaps one that doesn't work and play well with peers as maybe it could. But your sort of openness, it lends itself to all of the elements you mentioned, Sean, but it also really starts to help develop ecosystem and allow you to better collaborate with unrelated entities to drive new forms of value, or at least that's the potential. But thank you for that detail. Sean, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you as we start to back into the topic of generative AI. In your work with, certainly with Deutsche Bank, Publicis Sapient and Deutsche Bank have a relationship today, but you also have the benefit of looking across the market. I'd love for you to maybe give us some comments on what are you seeing demand-wise in terms of generative AI, and really what is your firm doing to ensure that you can bring skills to the table, but also help your clients really unlock the opportunity?
I think it's a very rapidly evolving space. I think what we've seen, and we've obviously seen this Gil together, both in terms of Deutsche Bank, but obviously looking outside, is that I think it's gone through kind of mini waves, even in terms of Gen AI, where the initial kind of wave was, a little bit of discovery in terms of, okay, well, really, what can this technology do and how can it be applied? And again, I think that's kind of a general pattern that we've seen with other clients, through to kind of both getting the business on board, but also kind of unpacking use cases, right? Because I think people have seen the power of what they can do, and that's where great things like the access to technology like ChatGPT has really opened that up to an audience that we couldn't have dreamed of, I think, beforehand. But now I think we've gone past that. Now it's a case in terms of productionize it. So for us, what we're seeing broadly across the board is, we get all the use cases. We have many, organizations helping us, and we kind of know that ourselves. What can you do in terms of saying to actually put the right guardrails in place so that, from a CRO perspective or legal perspective or an audit or compliance, and frankly, even from a regulator, that we can kind of evident that we're pushing the envelope in terms of technology, but we're also kind of playing safe. Because, at the end of the day, lots of the use cases, yes, can be used in back office, and they can be used in terms of replacements for RPA, streamlining kind of, the flow of work. But ultimately, the real power comes if you can put it in colleague or customer's hands. And that's really then where you rub up against the ethics questions, is this safe? Am I people doing what they should be doing with my data?
What I'd love to do briefly, Gil, is because we've been talking broadly about Gen AI, I'd love to, if you're game for it, talk a bit more specifically about how Deutsche Bank is leveraging Gen AI. Because one thing that was mentioned both in Sean's comments and in your comments, Gil, there's a lot of use cases out there. And with any new exciting tool, you run the risk of it's that hammer looking for a nail type of scenario. Oh, I have this cool new thing. What the heck can I do with it? Now, mind you, you have to go through that cycle to figure out what it is, what it's good for, what the risks are, what guardrails you need. But you've been at this for coming up on a couple of years now. What's really passing muster? When you sort of go from use case and a good idea to what's really yielding value, do you have anything you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned it, but I'll give 3 examples. The first one is just software development. Software development is going to be transformed, and it's not so much as the generative aspect of creating new code. It's actually documentation also. It's also understanding old code. We still have, and we're not the only ones that have a lot of legacy code. For example, COBOL, a language that was used in the past. You have new people coming in having no idea how to fix or to deal with that code or maybe replicate it. A generative AI tool can easily, go through the code and actually explain what it's doing and even suggest a way to migrate it or rewrite it in a different. So it's not, there is generative AI capability, but there's also a very close human in the loop in that entire process. Documentation, it's not something that people like to do. It's required. With a single click. You can get a documentation also. It's important for regulatory reasons. It definitely will improve the efficiency of our developers. So all of that space is really, really exciting. The second thing, I would call it the chatbots, the various chatbots. So, and that could be from interactions where we're seeing right now. This entire conversation could be transcribed, summarized with action items. So there's going to be a lot of interesting capabilities around chatbots, around just transcription, translation into multiple languages, but not only into multiple languages, but include the different nuances of every business and their specific additional, terms and elements that they used in their conversation. So being able to then take a body of documents and being able to inquire it, to summarize it quickly, again, with a human in the loop, is going to be extremely important. And we're seeing a huge amount of that, which falls into the banking area and what we call the research area. But the research area is not just researching a market or a specific stock. It is even a salesperson or anybody that is researching a company will use the same kind of tools. So I think that large language models and the body of work and the chatbot will be initially being used as kind of an advisor, somebody that you could use in order to accelerate refine and accelerate your output. And that over time we'll get more and more comfortable with that. And the last but not least, I would say that we're seeing also the use of large language models with anti-money laundering and trying to figure out how do we also use all of the data that we have in order to improve the resiliency and the compliance of the bank. And I just think that requires the regulatory on board, and that will take a bit more time. But those would be my three topics. Again, software development, the chatbot interactions, and obviously regulatory.
And then the other piece of it is, and this is again is more on the kind of revenue generating areas of streams, right? So rather than pure cost outplay, so what can be done in terms of intelligence around pricing and product and service offering, and frankly, how can you use that technology to be even more insightful and more personalized around dynamic generation of that. We're kind of used to the kind of physical world, the lock-in in terms of the price at the point in time is what it is, or the product at the point in time is what it is. And frankly, financial services has been guilty as any industry in terms of actually not being, as responsive as it should be. I think we're going to see a massive change in that. Probably, in the next, 12 to 24 months, you're going to see smart products, smart pricing, intelligent products, more reactive products that take into account the, where you are in a journey, frankly, where you are from a life moment perspective, to be more responsive in terms of actually providing right product, right price at the right time in terms of that side of things, which again, I think, Gil, we've talked about this in the past, but certainly is really exciting, because that's really where you're getting to the fact in terms of saying, well, why can't I do this? Why can't I offer that product? Why can't you price it? It tends to be in the past in terms of saying you couldn't do it because either the cost of change was too high, or just the understanding in terms of actually what to do to make that happen. Goes back to my point in terms of legacy, it was just too unconnected and it was too much spaghetti. I think GenAI is really simplifying that problem. It's got the data, it's got the understanding, So I think from our perspective, we see that as a huge area.
It starts to force the hand of many enterprises. So a lot of good themes there. All right, gentlemen, I love this conversation. We've got to take it home though. So I want to end on an actionable recommendation note. I'd love for each of you to share your top recommendation for other financial services leaders, or as we've talked about, even outside of financial services across industries. But your best recommendation for leaders embarking on a generative AI journey. What do you think they can do to best harness the value and not the hype associated with Gen AI? Sean, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, I think, look, it's a bit of an overused sort of adage, but it is a journey, right? And I think there's foundational building blocks you need to get right, and they cut across things where, it's outside of technology, and absolutely that's important. Find the right partners, finding the right kind of, infrastructure, things like what Deutsche Bank had done with Gil driving in terms of cloud, et cetera, a bunch of those, but also, making sure in terms of saying that you're connected to the business, that somewhere you're connected in terms of saying where this is going to impact in terms of customer at the end of the day, has to be sort of front and center in terms of the approach you take into it, because otherwise it becomes, tech for tech. So therefore, I definitely encourage in terms of saying take the longer term view, and try and get the basics in place.
Got it. Thank you, Sean. Gil, what would you like to add? What's your actionable recommendation?
I would add just one thing, again, very focused on generative AI. I think that people undervalue and underestimate the interaction and the knowledge of their own company and employees. So if you look at what Google has done in the past and its engine around the internet, was they understood that the interactions, the questions, the keywords that the search questions were key to developing the underlying capabilities. And the same thing is happening around large language models. You have a great engine there, but actually the questions, what is called usually the prompts, are key, and they're very unique by every company. And what I would recommend is the people to understand that that's their intellectual property. That's the unique sauce of their company. And they should, from day one, consider that and think about how do they capture that, analyze that, and harvest and continuously improve that. And so it's a big mindset set for corporations, because they need to think differently. It's actually all of those interactions and that body of work, which in essence will be their key to their success in the future.
Got it. Thank you for that, Gil. All right. So we've got foundations from Sean. We've got, I think, value the insights and the unique perspective, sort of what's unique about your enterprise, is two key recommendations for long-term success with generative AI. I'd love to thank my fantastic panelists, Gil, Sean. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience with us today. And that concludes this edition of HFS Unfiltered. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.